This is Dr. Licata, and you are with what? The NeuroNoodle Podcast?
Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology Podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He is the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you, like our gold supporter, Applied Neuroscience, and our silver supporter, Mind Media. Earn up to 16 CEU hours by attending Applied Neuroscience's NeuroGuide Workshop March 4th and 5th in Madeira Beach, Florida. It's led by none other than Dr. Robert Thatcher himself. There are two ways you can attend, online or in person, with the link appliedneuroscience.com/attend-ng-workshops. Mind Media, get the latest EEG and neurofeedback technology from mindmedia.com. Their semi-dry sensor cap is a wonder to see, and their EEG amplifiers have been trusted in the field for decades. Their neurofeedback and QEEG courses will get you up to speed in no time. Visit mindmedia.com now. Dr. Licata, my Susan brother, welcome to the NeuroNoodle Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Oh, yeah. We saw each other, in October?
October in sunny Tucson.
Tucson City.
Yeah. No, we had a great time. It was fantastic. It was great meeting everybody there. And you and I got to spend some time outside of the lecture hall. It was a good time.
I don't know if it was outside the lecture hall or right next to the bar. Either way.
Well, they're very close to each other.
Well, the yacht club here ends up structuring itself just perfectly for the organization. So having a bar in the back and a spot for people to chill out and it fit everybody just fine. 70 people with enough room to not feel crowded and enough throughput fresh air to keep it from being, too much of an indoor super spreader event. And luckily nobody caught anything except for one person the last day went out to a bar and the next morning, Sunday morning, didn't feel well, didn't come into the group, just basically packed up and went home and then tested positive. So
that's right. That's right. But, and they should have just stayed at the yacht club that night. No, it was a fantastic time. I look forward to next year. And, talk about condensing huge amounts of information and insight into 3 or 4 days. It was invaluable. So,
you gotta catch this year's. Dirk de Ritter, MD, PhD neurosurgeon, will be there, and he's awfully sharp and does neurofeedback and everything. I mean, all the way to cutting and implanting and things like that. And so will Martijn Arns from Europe. So I think we're going to have a stellar keynote group, and they're fun people. So
absolutely,
I think you're going to have a good time.
Please tell our listeners and watchers, you're in California, Vital Head and Spine. Please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'll make it quick. So we're now Vital Brain Health. For the last 15 years or so, we were focusing on concussions, chronic pain, and migraines using a specialized form of chiropractic that focused on the base of the brainstem. And so it was called NUCA. And so we influenced blood flow, cerebral spinal fluid flow, proprioceptive, mechanoreceptive input in and out of the brain. So that was a big deal. And we did that for many years. About 5 years ago, we started partnering with the company that was doing some neurofeedback and brain mapping for our concussion cases. And long story short, after about a year of doing that, I discovered immense value in brain mapping and immense value in understanding what was going on with our concussion cases and why no two concussions are the same and why some people had dizziness and vertigo and other people had massive anxiety and other people were all of a sudden becoming ADHD. And so The brain mapping helped us understand how to kind of approach it, and then how to create an ad hoc team of interprofessionals to kind of, solve that individual's issue. So that's what introduced me to this. And then shortly after that, I partnered actually with Andrew Hill in Los Angeles, and he helped us get set up in our office. And we started doing brain mapping ourselves. We started going from 1 room to 2 rooms to 3 to 4. We now have a phenomenal team in Los Angeles, and we do neurofeedback, neuromodulation, neurostimulation. And about a year and a half ago, maybe close, yeah, about a year and a half ago, I met Jay. I nagged the heck out of him, and I started asking for a session or two where we can sit down and look at EEGs. And then that turned into Tuesdays with Gunkelman. And then I wanted more, so we started doing Mondays and Tuesdays with Gunkelman. And for about a year and a half, we were doing it twice a week, looking at hundreds and hundreds of EEGs. Now here we are. So now it's exclusively brain mapping and neurofeedback and neuromodulation. And we're in Los Angeles. The last thing I would say to that is we see primarily, kids with ADHD and dysregulation, adults with anxiety, baby boomers with pre-dementia or dementia issues, and we can kind of explore any of that if you want. But that's it. That's the short and long of it.
Well, I have in my notes here sleep and attention. We, with Jay, we tend to stay on the map for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then it's all bets are off.
Yeah.
But I hear you got some pretty good slides, because our viewers. Sorry, listeners, you got to come to YouTube and watch what's going on. It's an EEG. I hear you got a pretty good slideshow to bring up.
Well, yeah, let's use it, and then we can riff in any direction we want to take it. But we'll use this for our visual learners, and because frankly, when I tune into your show, Pete, I'm usually switching pretty quickly from my podcast to YouTube. I like looking at the EEGs. I like looking at the slides. And so I just want to have this available. And then I'll make the slides available at the end for viewers if they want as well. So,
very cool.
All right. So, Jay, and of course, as always, feel free to interrupt, tell me where I'm wrong. Or what I love the best is let's tell me about the backstory of some of these researchers that published the research that I'm going to present on, because actually Martine Arens is one of them. So, all right, so here we go. So sleep attention and neurofeedback is going to be our conversation today. 3 points. This is what I hope our listeners and our viewers take home today. There's a deep relationship between sleep and attention. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about looking at the 3 stages of sleep, but we're going to kind of then, go pretty quickly into vigilance and sleep, so we can kind of make sense about what everybody's talking about online. And then we're going to look at some brain patterns, some inherent brain patterns, and how neurofeedback can help. All right, so that's going to be our top 3. All right, and so Pete's pumping his fists. So, yeah, there we go. Okay. A good friend of mine introduced me to this concept. This dude was, I think, a Supreme Court justice or a justice. He said, basically, I wouldn't give a fig for simplicity on this side of complexity, but I give my life for simplicity on the other side of complexity. Now, what does that mean? It means that we can obviously, often oversimplify stuff. And, we hear the talking heads on the podcast and social media, and they, we oversimplify things, and they don't quite match reality. Jay is a master at taking really, really complex concepts, ideas, and bringing them back to simplicity. But it's on the other side. He did his homework. He did the hard work, and so we're going to try to do that today, and we'll see how successful we are. When I talk with parents, they want Johnny to pay better attention. They want him to not be jumping up and down all the time. They want him to sit still in his chair. And also they'll talk about how Johnny has issues sleeping, or he's he gets this big burst of energy about at 7 p.m. And then we do a brain map, and we're seeing Johnny falling asleep after 40 seconds, 50 seconds sometimes. And parents don't quite yet, I think, make the connection between the two. I'm going to show a couple quick, studies. We're not going to go too deep into them unless Jay wants to jump in at all. But one is that, this you're just kind of pointing to sleep deprivation and how it basically starts affecting attention during the day. This is showing that sleep deprivation doubled the odds of making errors and triples the number of lapses, right, in attention. I'll include the links to these papers afterwards, but it's like, well, wait a second. If Johnny didn't sleep well last night, the night before, the night before that, the night before that, Johnny's going to have a hard time paying attention and sitting still at school today and tomorrow and the next day, right? Here's again, lapses of attention. Here we can actually start to see and predict that, there'll be lapses of attention, behavioral markers of mind wandering and mind blanking with these kind of strange sleep-like slow waves, right? And we're seeing how these things are being affected, how we're seeing more of these sleep-like slow waves during the day. And it seems like they have some influence or some relationship with what's happening and what the kids aren't getting enough of the night before and so on, right? The last one is it seems to sleep not only affects our child's attention, it seems to directly affect their learning, right? And so Matthew Walker is a phenomenal speaker on this, and so I recommend that most parents go in and study and learn from him. He wrote a book called, I think, Why We Sleep. He's a PhD out of UC Berkeley, and basically the long and short of it is he wrote this paper, and this is basically understanding learning and sleep. And he uses this metaphor. He says, there's an area of the brain called the hippocampus that it serves like a thumb drive in the brain. And if we need to get good sleep, Johnny needs to get good sleep the night before so that his thumb drive is cleared out so that he can actually have short-term memory during the day in class today, right? So sleep last night affects how well he learns today in class. And then when he goes to bed tonight, when he goes through certain stages of sleep, he clears out that thumb drive. He consolidates it in the brain. And then in another stage of sleep, he actually integrates all that information, clears out his thumb drive so that tomorrow he's got a clear thumb drive to now take in new information, right? Sleep has a vital role with actually how Johnny learns and how he does in class. And this study, I think, yes, this study, Matthew Walker mentions, affected test scores. They were slightly older Johnnies. I think they were college students, but it affected test scores by 40%. It affected learning and learning retention by 40%, right? That's the difference between an A and an F, right? So these are important things. And so he goes into the memory encoding, consolidation, and neuroplasticity with that, right? So great, I'll include the links and, I'll have that available for everybody. Okay, well, what are these sleep stages? We're not gonna go too deep into, some of the neuroscience behind it. I mentioned Matthew Walker. I'm gonna mention probably two other names. Andrew Huberman is a master communicator and educator. And so, go to the Huberman Lab. We invited him. He came and spoke to our group about, I think it was 2019, where we had a group of scientists speaking to practitioners in Pasadena. And I had the privilege of moderating that conversation. And so he's just phenomenal. And so he has so much great content. Andrew Huberman is the second person. And then the third would be Rhonda Patrick. She's also a PhD, and she has another blog or podcast called Found My Fitness. And so also three great resources. So we're not going to go too deep into this, but we're going to get a little bit nerdy on the neuroscience EEG side. Okay, so we're going to kind of do this for a second. Okay, so we're going to talk about the three stages of sleep because we just learned that, okay, well, there's these stages, and parents are always like, gosh, I feel guilty, for a million reasons of why I'm screwing up my kid. And now I'm going to feel guilty because they're not getting enough sleep. And so, but first of all, we're learning about the stages of sleep, and we learn about how they have different roles. And we also have stages of being awake. And so I want to see if I can kind of translate these two things. Okay. Jay, you have a sleep tracker, don't you?
Yep.
You got your Oura Ring, right? Yep. And so I have my Garmin watch. Other people have their Apples, and we used to require all of our clients, all of our new clients, to have Whoops. And so sleep tracking is something that I think is really becoming more and more popular, and people are starting to do it. And we usually kind of break it down into, deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep. It's kind of this simple three because we think in threes, right? One, two, three, many. And so it simplifies things for us, right? And so now I'm showing basically a picture of an iPhone with an app on it, which is the Oura app, and it says awake, light sleep, deep sleep, and REM. Okay. So, well, what does that mean, and how do we start translating this, right? Well, the light sleep and deep sleep is basically what we call non-REM sleep. So now we're getting a little bit technical. So when Matthew Walker or Andrew Huberman starts talking sleep science, correct me if I'm wrong, but they basically break down, our stages of sleep into two basic phases: non-REM and REM, right? And so then we go and see, well, actually, non-REM, they used to divide it into four, but they simplified it. And so now they divide it into three. And so now we have non-REM 1, non-REM 2, non-REM 3, and REM sleep, right? And it seems like we're going through these different stages at night, and we cycle through them a few times, as we go through the 8 hours. And so what we're seeing is that now, how do I translate the things that Andrew Huberman's talking about on his podcast with my Oura Ring app, right? Well, it turns out that, when it says light sleep on my Oura Ring, that means it's a combo between N1 and N2, non-REM 1 and non-REM 2 sleep. Okay, that's cool. Deep sleep, well, they call that non-REM 3, right? And Jay was reminding me also, before they used to call it non-REM 3 and non-REM 4, but they were so close together, they just said, let's just consolidate it. Is that right, Jay?
There are percentages of the time you saw slow waves in the EEG. 3 was 20 to 50 and 4 was over 50. They found that there wasn't any significant difference between the two as far as the impact on everything. So they combined them, and the N3 is all you need now. You don't need to specify the percentage of time you're in. You have slow waves in the EEG. So, cut down. We have N1, 2, and 3. There's no N4 in modern sleep medicine. If you go back a couple decades, you see a lot of stage 3, stage 4 discussion, but again, there wasn't any significant difference.
It's great, and it helps consumers and laymen and myself, it makes sense of this stuff, right? Because it's like, well, let's just cut it down. Good. And then there's REM sleep, right? And then just so real quickly, if we go back to the Matthew Walker study and some of the ways that he describes it, it seems like here, like real quickly with learning, it seems like memory consolidation is happening in that deep sleep, that N3, right? And then it seems like actually there have been some other studies that show that, like, well, if I'm learning piano, if Johnny's learning piano during the day, well, at night, his brain is actually reestablishing and reinforcing the motor movement of his piano lessons during light sleep, either N1 or N2 or both. And then it's in REM sleep that all of a sudden there's all that integration, right? And all of all the new creative connections that are happening, and the replaying of those things is happening in REM. And so which part of sleep is the most important, right? Which sleep? If I'm only going to get one, which should it be? Well, everybody keeps talking about you need all of them. You need all of them. Each one has a job. We're going to kind of step away from our app, and now we start looking at some squiggly lines. What's interesting is that people like Jay and others are masters of the squiggly lines, but it seems like these squiggly lines seem to be kind of a primary language of sleep and wakefulness, right? Which are these EEGs, right? And so here, we start seeing now how There's theta waves are more present in slow waves during light sleep. And then we start seeing sleep spindles and K complexes as well. And then we go into the slow wave delta waves with deep sleep. And then, of course, REM seems to kind of pick back up with beta. There's a pause that I always want to make here. And I usually want to say, look, EEG appears to be the primary language of sleep and waking, right? It's the primary language. It's not the only language, but so the Oura Rings and the sleep apps, the reason why their technology works is because they're always comparing it to the gold standard, which is the EEG. And so somebody thinks I'm popular, so they're going to call and they'll hang up in a second. If EEG seems to be the primary language, let's see if we can kind of take this a couple steps, and then I'm going to let you, Jay, run with this for a second. But we've got these sleep stages, right? And we see the correlates. We can actually see this when somebody puts on their swimmer's cap and all of their sensors. And we can start to now measure the sleep stages, right? So we see the N1, N2, N3 in REM, and we see their correlate squiggly lines. And again, this is on YouTube. You'll see it, and you guys can also request the slides. But now we get to see, what a lot of us in the EEG and QEEG world are looking at and think about often, which are the vigilance states. Well, wait a second. There's not just stages of sleep, but there's also stages of wakefulness. And again, we call it vigilance, and is vigilance meaning awake? Well, they're rough translations, but they're not pure translations. But now it appears that there's actually there's a little bit of a spectrum of being awake and being asleep. And it seems like, again, EEG seems to be the primary language as to how we see those things, right? Jay, do you want to riff on anything regarding the vigilance, sleep, and the stages?
As an approach was developed primarily in Europe. Its most recent promoter was Gerald Ulrich, who's a retired psychiatrist from Berlin, who wrote a book on theoretical interpretation of the EEG, focusing on the vigilance model. But it was a spinoff off of Benti in the 60s, actually. But stage A is more awake. Stage B is kind of drowsy. But as we saw, kids that don't sleep spend quite a bit of time in this drowsy state that's not really, able to focus. Stage A1, alpha's in the back of your head, prominent alpha at the back of your head. They look at the eyes closed EEG, and A2, alpha has creeped up into the front, where normally if your frontal lobe has not got alpha in it, it's busy doing the association cortex, running attention and affect and motor function and some forms of memory. But as it starts to have alpha in it, it's going to rest. It's a resting state. So A1, the back of your head is at rest because your eyes are closed. A2, the frontal lobe has gone to rest. A3, the frontal lobe is dominant over the back. So this is a progression, less and less and less vigilant. All those still awake in the alpha stages. B1, alpha drops out. The reticular nucleus of the thalamus quits making acetylcholine. The thalamus can't make rhythmicity without the acetylcholine. So the rhythm drops out. And then theta rhythms start to build up. B2, theta's up front. B3, the slow content is prominent up front. And you start to see what's called vertex activity. Not a vertex sharp wave of sleep, which is stage C in this model, but vertex activity of drowsing. So you've gone from wide awake with alpha in the back of your head to alpha up front, where you're not as focused and attentive, to alpha dropping out, where it's hard to make a memory if you don't have an alpha rhythm going, and then theta up front and at the vertex, where you're actually substantially drowsy. Again, kids that don't sleep at night end up in this B2, B3 stage in school, eyes open, but nobody's home. They're drowsy, basically. So these stages progress. You can progress from A's all the way straight down to the B's. Sometimes people kind of vacillate with labile vigilance regulation. Some people have a stable, rigid vigilance regulation. When they close their eyes, they lock into the alpha state and they never ever change. That's not proper either. You should expect to stay generally awake for the first 5 minutes of a 10-minute eyes closed EEG. And the second 5 minutes, you expect some B stages. You don't expect to see sleep in the 10 minutes of a recording with the eyes closed. In fact, in a sleep lab, if you fall asleep before 5 minutes in the multiple sleep latency test screening, you qualify for an all-night sleep study because you've fallen asleep too fast, so fast that you can't be sleeping well at night because you're falling asleep during the day, precipitous sleep. It's a precipitous descent into stage 2 sleep, or stage C in the vigilance model. And the sleep stages are important for memory, and you've mentioned that, but you go through multiple 90-minute sleep cycles. The early part of the night, those sleep cycles are dominated by slow wave sleep. And in slow wave sleep, your brain is producing growth hormone. And growth hormone, you get dendritic sprouts, you get dendritic spines, you get dendritic new connections. That growth happens, and that has to happen to lay down the substrate to play back your REM, which the last half of the night, their 90-minute sleep cycles are dominated by REM. And during REM, you're playing back the recollections of the day through these new connections, and you're long-term potentiating the knowledge. So you've essentially dumped your memory into a brand new spot that's going to end up keeping it permanently, so you don't have to hold it in the short-term working memory. Working memory only has a certain capacity. And if you don't clear out your working memory by actually transferring it to long-term potentiated memory, you end up having a capacity problem. So proper sleep actually requires a number of these 90-minute sleep cycles. Ideally, you have like 6 of them in a night. If you restrict the total amount of sleep, you end up missing a couple of those cycles, and you suffer a bit from that. If you restrict sleep, it catches up with you.
Jay, could you touch on that study that you've brought up before, since 99, the amount of sleep that kids are not getting?
Oh, sure. The theta-beta ratio used to look at the amount of theta, which you can see here would be kind of assumed to be a B stage where theta comes up. They look at the amount of theta and the amount of beta, and that theta-beta ratio was used in 1999 to identify individuals that had ADD. And it was 95 to 98% accurate at identifying normal kids from ADD kids. And the excess theta and deficit of fast activity in the beta band was a biomarker, a neuromarker. And that data was accepted by the FDA. They considered it a diagnostic metric. It's a biomarker for, again, ADD. The thing is, since 1999, kids sleep on the average 2 hours less per night. And the theta-beta ratio, which used to be predictive, is no longer predictive. Gives you the same odds as flipping a coin now. And if the testing gives you no better odds than flipping a coin, save me the hookup with the electrogel and everything. Give me a coin and I'll tell you whether you're ADD or not, with the same level of accuracy. It's not any longer a diagnostic metric because you can't diagnose. In fact, now the normal people tested for theta beta ratio are worse than the clinical group was in 1999. Now, the clinical group has gotten
huge.
worse as well, but you can't differentiate them because, again, of restricted sleep. The theory is that kids are going to bed with their tablets and phones and media, and little Johnny will text Johnny 2, and Johnny 2 will text Johnny 3, and they get a little group text going, and your phone will beep, will wake you up. You respond, waking everybody else up. So as you're falling asleep, the media going back and forth between people ends up getting in the way. Early in the morning, your email lights up with all the spam that arrives about 5, 6 in the morning when all the marketers are busy from the East Coast, spamming people on the West Coast at 5 in the morning. So you waken back up with beeps and lights. The quality of sleep requires good sleep hygiene, which isn't taking a shower before you go to bed. I mean, sleep hygiene
well.
is, when was the last time you ate? Did you eat just before you went to bed, and your body's going to have to stay awake as a body in order to process and digest? When was, are you going to bed on time? Or did you stay up late, restricting the total amount of time sleep's available? There's a whole list of things that you can do. Sleep hygiene
is huge.
Tricks. And at that point, if you optimize your sleep hygiene, you pay attention to the data on an Oura Ring or a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, you can actually optimize your sleep, normalizing disturbed sleep patterns. And, you think, 40% increase in school performance is an A to an F. Well, maybe that's really quite significant. But, I'm way older. I'm not in school anymore. So what the hell? I'm not going to worry about a performance on a test, but performance in life. I mean, if you're not sleeping well, the likelihood of having a traffic accident because you were inattentive for a few seconds goes way up. Missed sleep, jump shift on shift change in a industry. Things like Chernobyl happen. So.
And also the accumulation of beta amyloid plaque and other metabolites, because we're not able to flush the toilet of the brain every night with our deep sleep, right? With the glymphatic system, with the G. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, all those are huge.
Earn up to 16 CEU hours by attending Applied Neurosciences NeuroGuide Workshop March 4th and 5th in Madeira Beach, Florida. It's led by none other than Dr. Robert Thatcher himself. There are 2 ways you can attend, online or in person, with the link appliedneuroscience.com/attend-ng-workshops.
And I think, like you said, Jay, in the past as well, is that, so there are going to be these external things that influence our sleep. And again, thank God we have the Hubermans and the Matthew Walkers and others of the world that are just, reaching millions and millions of people at a time. But there are also intrinsic, components and things that actually will, they're going to influence Johnny's ability to be able to sleep or not sleep, right? These may be these phenotypes that you've mentioned. That's actually where we're going to go next, if you're okay with it, Jay.
Yeah. And picking the name Johnny is actually reasonably appropriate, because in ADD, ADHD, there's a male greater than female percentage that's presented.
Okay. Well, there you go. Right. Great. The next step in my thought process was, there's also in the sleep research and sleep science, Jay, you're very well aware of this, is that there's this idea of a sleep-wake cycle. That there's this, ideally we go deeper into these lower stages, or we're able to go through these lower stages and have good, healthy sleep during the nighttime, so that we are more vigilant and awake during the daytime. And so the ability to seesaw and go up and down throughout the 24-hour cycles are kind of very helpful and useful. And it seems like a lot of us, and Johnny, it seems like a lot of times we're kind of hovering. They're kind of hovering in this like B1, B2, 3, C stage. They're not getting as great sleep at night, and they're not fully awake and vigilant during the day. They're in this weird hover because they're not able to seesaw as well, right?
And the EEG patterns that people report in ADD, ADHD include frontal alpha, like the A3 stage of decreased vigilance, and also frontal theta, like the B stages. There's a small rare subset with beta spindling in it. The beta spindling pattern basically disturbs sleep, so it's a problematic pattern in and of itself.
Absolutely. And actually, that's where we're going to go next. So we start seeing that there are these patterns. There are these patterns that go on with Johnny, and we're going to keep using him. But the idea, again, is that, look, there's this language. EEG continues to be this primary language that we can start to understand the wakefulness and sleep and in between. At one point, you had another guest on the show, Pete. He was talking about how light and EMF and other things, external things, are influencing our sleep, and that's valid and that's wonderful. And like I said, there are other professionals and experts that are the experts in those fields, and that's why I keep bringing up some names, and I'm sure there are many others. But I'm not an expert in that. I 4 years ago, I was teaching other health professionals about sleep and sharing the research that was out there, because I was like, hey, I felt like I was on the front end of this. Now, look, people that are so much better than I are doing this because that's their work, and they do great with it. But my expertise, right? Jay's expertise is not so much on sleep hygiene. Thank God there's others out there. We're sharing the information. It's out there. But I think what we're really great at is identifying and helping the internal things, right? So here's a picture, right? What are we looking at here? We're looking at, maybe this is another Johnny, right? This is Johnny 5. Here's a gamer, right? He's sitting in his room. I'm picturing this guy. It's probably 3 a.m. He's drinking his energy drink filled with taurine and caffeine and other kinds of things that are stimulants. He's got blue light like crazy shooting out of these monitors. He's got like 2 or 3 monitors going, and these are video games that use neuromarketing to activate dopamine reward centers, which is addiction, adrenaline centers. Like they're designed to activate and create a huge amount of cortisol and adrenaline at 3 a.m., right? Those are all external factors. Okay, that's great. But if you had 1,000 Johnnies doing the same thing, why would it affect some maybe more than others? Like, why are some brains going to be more affected than others with these changes, right? And so what we're going to look at today, and this is going to be part 3, and we're going to then be wrapping this up, are the internal factors, right? Because that's what I'm good at. It's what I see every day, right? And this is what largely it's based on a lot of Jay's contribution. And so what we call internal factors, right, Jay, and I'll give you the floor whenever you want on this, is that there's phenotypes. There are underlying patterns that have been shown using hundreds, if not thousands, of EEGs, correlated with genetic variants, and reproduced. Here's a study on the sleep phenotypes of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and looking at basically children and phenotypes that are present in the brain, right? I'm going to look at 2 more, and then Jay, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, they basically expect that about 25 to 50% of the kids that are diagnosed with ADD actually have an underlying sleep disorder. If you actually get the sleep disorder treated, their attention problem seems to wane. And some of them have a primary disorder of vigilance, kind of like narcolepsy without the cataplexy. and they basically just cannot maintain appropriate level of vigilance or monitor their sleep. Obviously, there's some of them that have a delayed sleep cycle, a delayed latency. They will stay up late, but then they can't get up in the morning. And that delayed circadian rhythm ends up having a high probability of having a bipolar disorder later in life. You've got some people that have a breathing disorder at night. If you're not sleeping because you're not breathing and you got to wake up to breathe, apneas or hypopneas, that's going to disturb your ability to stay awake during the day. And quite a few people that can't stay awake during the day end up having respiratory problems at night. Again, apnea is either obstructive or central. Central apnea, your brain is not telling your body to breathe, and that's very serious. You have to end up on a breathing device to keep your breathing at night so that you can actually sleep. Some people have restless leg syndrome or periodic leg movement, and that obviously can keep you awake as well. And then there's a percentage that actually have epilepsy. They have convulsions or epileptiform discharges that disturb their sleep at night. There's something called ESES, electrographic status epilepticus of sleep. We've actually had very good success with that kind of epilepsy, which is quite often considered an intractable form of epilepsy. We have very good success training people to escape the seizures and medications that are required to control the seizures as well. In fact,
and in fact, you and I have worked on a case over this last year of a small child that has this, and also, we've seen dramatic improvements over the last year with him as well.
One little case that we did a video on to kind of promote the idea of this kind of a treatment for epilepsy was the case Maggie from up in the Detroit area. She's now seizure-free and medication-free for 7 years. So this wasn't a temporary effect. And they were paying over $1,000 a month for the copay of one of her medications. So not having to worry about SUDEP, sudden death from epilepsy, SUDEP, and not having to pay $1,000+ a month. The relief of the mental stress, the family stress,
and the progressive, brain damage that comes from ESES, because that's something that was, that we've observed over time as well with other clients. And so, it's huge.
Yeah. So we're very, very happy to see, 7 years of positive outcome without any regression. Now, it's not like she didn't have things happen. When she was 1.5 years, she had a shunt put in because of high pressure in her ventricles. And after we treated her with the neurofeedback, or she learned the neurofeedback and stopped having seizures, her shunt failed. And she ended up having a high fever and was hospitalized. They had her on a seizure watch. They assumed that she was going to have a seizure. I mean, history of intractable epilepsy and a fever, and you're going to go in and replace the shunt. That they kind of expected nothing. She went through that with no seizures whatsoever. And
was the neurofeedback similar to what we were doing here with our case, which was primarily SMR training?
Yes. Sensory motor rhythm, SMR, is the name bears German applied to the signal. It's the same thing as a sleep spindle. Same generator, a little bit of a different distribution because the projection pathways during sleep are a little bit more wide open. But it's basically a sleep pattern, and you can enhance it as a stabilizing agent during the day. The sleep spindle happens right after a vertex wave. In stage 2, as you're starting to fall asleep, stage 2 is deeper than stage 1, just before slow wave sleep. And you get a vertex wave, which is the brain's response to a stimulus. And as soon as the brain responds to that stimulus, it will either wake you up or you're going to have a sleep spindle, which is a stabilizing agent, and it will continue to drift off into slow wave sleep. Well, without a good SMR during the day, you won't have a good sleep spindle at night. And if you don't have a good sleep spindle at night, you're going to not get to your slow wave sleep. You're going to bounce back up awake. You have difficulty with sleep onset and wakefulness, insomnia. So SMR can be trained for people that have beta spindles and difficulty with sleep onset and wakefulness, and it helps stabilize them for their sleep. It also helps stabilize during the day for seizures and things such as that. So SMR training ends up having positive impact on your quality of your sleep. There's actually an enhancement of semantic and declarative memory performance after you learn SMR, which again helps with the quality of your sleep, and obviously that assists us with sleep with memory.
Yep, and we have the EEG phenotypes, which you're also on this one, for outcome predictions. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, right after I published about the phenotype model of things, I was invited to do a talk over in Europe by Martijn at his office. I walked in the door. He had 49 ADD kids data and 49 match controls pulled out of the Australian database, and I had to go through and phenotype each of the studies. And in the phenotype model, it predicted that one phenotype, anterior rhythmic slow activity, would be a positive predictor of the response to methylphenidate. And they already knew which one of these kids had responded positively to methylphenidate. They were looking to see whether the phenotype model would predict accurately. And we did predict quite accurately who responded to methylphenidate. After our outcome, they offered that data set to anybody who could make a better guess as to who might respond to methylphenidate. And they offered $5,000 reward. Now I didn't get $5,000 for the original work, but this was Martijn Arns believed that the phenotype model, which got away from the DSM and just looked at biomarkers, basically, was a way to focus on treatment. There were appropriate treatments matched up with the phenotypes. If you had this pattern, you got that treatment. The phenotypes are genetically linked patterns. Rather than basing your treatments on somebody's behavioral report, the DSM-based approach, which doesn't predict accurately what will treat somebody, the phenotype model gets away from the DSM and using biomarkers predicts effective treatment. So he saw that as a major step and started immediately doing validation studies like this one when I walked in to do my first lecture for him. My next lecture, he had 126, I think, or 123 depressives and the same number of match controls. We phenotyped those. We actually looked at the inter-rater reliability on the phenotyping. Martijn had read my paper on phenotypes, which had no samples of EEG, just description, which EEG doesn't get described very well with words, I have to say. It goes up and down and up and down, So as it goes across
sometimes
the page,
fast, sometimes slow.
So, but we had a better than 90% accuracy, inter-rater reliability, which is there's statistics, Cohen's statistic that ends up doing a statistical job on that inter-rater reliability, and EEG has a difficult diagnostic inter-rater reliability. But this isn't diagnosis, it's just categorization. We're not trying to say something is normal or not normal. We're just saying, oh, there's frontal alpha. Oh, there's frontal theta. Oh, there's a paroxysm. And these are simple observations. I sometimes suggest that I could probably teach a pigeon to peck at the patterns, and they're very simple patterns.
And that's why there's hope for me.
There are there are people using AI to try to identify the phenotypes. This is kind of a current attempt at this point to let me retire without having to look at EEG anymore. Anyway, they're trying to automate the phenotype sorting. Now,
and the automation of it will be very helpful for, multiple things, including practitioners, to be able to do it so that we can do our job better. And also,
if you haven't seen 500,000 records already, you're not as good. So, and if you've only seen 1,000, you're not as good as somebody who's seen 10,000. So, it helps if you get something that automates it. The vigilance model, for instance, is automated. The vigilance algorithm is already automated. You can have 10 minutes of eyes closed EEG, and it'll go second by second by second and tell you what visual states you were in. So
yes,
it does happen.
And I think a big takeaway for me, and maybe for parents as well who are listening to even this slide itself, is also just understanding that you can get a lot of insight into Johnny's tendencies, right? Johnny's, and whether you want to use neurofeedback or you want to use medication, or you now have some insight as to which direction and which tools to use, because you understand what's going on with Johnny specifically, independent of his or her sleep hygiene, right? So, and I think this is probably one of the, you have many contributions, Jay, but this phenotype model has been phenomenal. And again, this is also going through vigilance stabilization, through sleep spindles, circadian networks. This is also with Martine Arns.
One of the things that Martine found is that if somebody's not sleeping well, there are therapies that won't work until they are sleeping well. And this includes TMS, the big magnet, $250,000 device or $100,000 device if you find an inexpensive one. You put it on the head and you zap the brain with a big electromagnet and can force the brain to discharge. They can use that for obsessive compulsive disorder at the anterior cingulate with the right kind of coil, double cone coil or an H coil. And at that point, treat the obsessive compulsive disorder if they're getting good sleep. If they're not sleeping, it's a waste of time. You're not going to have an effective outcome. Treat the sleep disorder, then do the TMS, and it's going to be effective. And that's, again, work by Martine Arns. Martine took to heart a question in 2005 in Berlin when Dirk de Ritter was at a party. Barry Sturman assigned Martine and I to make sure Dirk got back to the hotel, and Barry headed home a little earlier. And as we were chatting with Dirk, turns to Martine and I, says, "So, do you guys drive a car?" "Oh, yeah. Well, do you have a driver's license?" "Oh, yeah, of course." "Oh, do you have a PhD?" And Martine took that to heart. Martine had, he was a therapist. He had a clinic, but he was a master's degree, and he got his PhD. His PhD dissertation included the phenotype prediction for stimulant and depression, and he had like 5 PhDs all rolled into one. I always tell the students to trim down what you're trying to do with your PhD. Leave some neuroscience for the next guy. Somebody else is going to have a PhD after you. Don't solve the world's entire neuroscience problem in one. But he had one of those that you would have told him to pick one out of the 5 and do it and actually graduate instead of trying to finish all 5 and never getting out of school. But Martine is very, very efficient in turning out his research, and he turned out a PhD dissertation, which you can download from his Brain Clinic's website. He's continued to impress me as one of the most prolific researchers that that I have as a close friend. I know that there's some people that crank out research like he does, but I don't know them. So he's a unique character, very productive, just a genuinely nice guy too.
This is just going to kind of, I think, summarize some of what we've been talking about today, and it just presents some visuals for parents so that they can kind of translate a lot of these big words that we're using. And so again, if we're looking at a brain, what we're saying here is that in an ideal world, Johnny or Jane are able to go through deeper stages of sleep and over 8 hours of time, cycle through their 90-minute sessions, do all the physiological changes and mechanisms that need to occur, and then when they're awake, they're able to be fully awake and be in the higher states of vigilance, and they're able to go through this nice, beautiful seesaw, right? Fully asleep and in a very healthy way, and then fully awake. One issue that a lot of our kids are having is that they're not necessarily going too deep, and they're not able to have very strong sleep, and they're not able to have very strong vigilant wakefulness. That's one of the issues, right? That's the one that we're spending the most time on today. And so, and we're also talking about how, well, there's external and internal contributors to that fact. And the external are the ones that some of these other professionals are probably the experts on, like Huberman and Matthew Walker and others. But there's the internal, and we get to be, we happen to be, we have some expertise in this. And so these are some of the phenotypes, some of the patterns, Jay, that you've been mentioning, right? There's some frontal alpha. We can see that. And I'll give you time to kind of riff on both of these, and frontal beta spindles. And there's also low voltage alpha, and there's fast alpha speed, which is, what I want to do is just kind of give you some time and some space to kind of speak into this and have a visual for a parent who's, on YouTube who, is like, what, low voltage, who, right? So now they can kind of have something to kind of attach that to. So Jay, I'll let you run with it.
Sure. If you have fast alpha, you have a higher sampling rate, which is good for being bright and sharp and having great semantic and declarative memory, but you also have a high arousal level. So the foreswing is you're bright and sharp and you perform really well in memory tasks. The backswing is what gets you, not the foreswing.
Just to interrupt you, when I always joke and I say it's not that fun kind of arousal, right? You're talking about like fight or flight. It's not like sexual arousal. Is that correct? Just correct me if I'm wrong.
Or else we're talking about
great.
Level of vigilance arousal, not hedonic.
Okay, so more like they're just kind of stressed. They're more in a fight or flight as their baseline, right? As their normal baseline. Okay, good. Just wanted to clarify.
Being bright, but being so over aroused that you can't function well. Low voltage EEGs quite often are metabolic. If you have a difficulty with methylation, you can't generate the voltage that your brain needs to actually function well. Beta spindles, if they're in the central area, as physical over arousal. But if they're, and that's a difficulty with insomnia, sleep, the CZ beta spindle. But if the beta spindles are up front, it's impulsivity, hyperactivity. If the frontal lobe is full of alpha, instead of doing the normal attentional and affective and motor regulation that it's supposed to do, it's idled. And it doesn't regulate attention. It doesn't regulate affect. It doesn't regulate motor function properly. And the frontal lobes are important for some subtle motor function that we may not necessarily think of as frontal always. The frontal eye fields, visual accommodation and convergence, the ability not to say which direction the E is pointing on the chart, that's acuity, but actually the ability to converge your eyes on an object and focus properly and move across a page and read. So it's the ability of the eyes to do the work of the eyes, not just be able to see accurately what direction the E is pointing on a chart. It's not 20/20 vision. It's the ability of the eyes to actually do the work of reading and assessing. So the frontal eye fields regulate accommodation and convergence, the ability to focus the eyes and use them to look around. So the frontal lobes are really important, and with poor sleep, the frontal lobes are not just going to have alpha; they're going to start to have theta in them as well, because of starting to essentially be eyes open drowsy. So the EEG patterns give us insight into how to tweak the system to make it operate properly. We can teach you to slow down your alpha. We can teach you SMR to counter the beta spindles. We can suppress the alpha and teach you faster frequencies. We can work with other things to end up increasing the voltage. Sometimes there's a methylation issue, and you actually need a pharmacological intervention. Methyl B12 injections are not uncommon, but just B1, B3, B6, B12, exercise, aerobic exercise ends up helping with underlying voltage in the brain. But we can intervene if we see these patterns in order to help normalize, or perhaps a better term, optimize the brain function.
Right.
Normal is fine, but optimum is better. A normal grade in school is a C. Not so optimal, but normal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, and you don't know optimal until you know your map, right? And I think that's another. I'm just going to keep banging the same drum, right? Because it just informs so much of my own life, right? If you won't even know what's optimal for you until you get a map, and now you can create a strategy, right? So there is an order of operation that I think often gets missed. Otherwise, we just start reaching for tools, right? We just start going for things, or we even start doing neurofeedback on areas. But if we don't understand the brain, we don't understand what's dysregulated in me, then my game plan will be vastly different than what's going to be dysregulated in Pete, right? His journey is going to be a lot shorter than mine, right? So
there's no such thing as a standard protocol.
Correct.
You don't have standard brains, so you don't get a standard protocol. We have to look, find out what's going on, and figure out how to rebalance things properly. And the higher the performance that the person is trying to achieve, the more likelihood that they're going to have tune-ups. If you go to Indianapolis, they tune those cars multiple times a day. Elite athletes, if you're not sleeping really well as an elite athlete, you don't get your growth hormone, and you don't recover from the wear and tear of the workout. So you get little micro tears in your muscle that ends up being a muscle strain that puts you down. You don't remember from REM what the coach told you the day before. So you can't be an elite athlete if you don't have elite brain operation. Simply messing up your sleep is enough to take you out of the top 1%. And
no, absolutely.
We've actually worked with the Australian Institute for Sports with SMR training for elite athletes that had insomnia, which was a very common complaint. They identified that as a common complaint for their athletes, and they came to us, and we designed the SMR protocol. They actually did a study, had a control group, actually did sleep studies on them. They got much better performance from the people that learned the SMR. They subjectively reported their sleep to be better. They objectively measured their sleep to be better using Actigraph, which is kind of like a Fitbit for sleep labs. And so they knew that it benefited them. At this point, if there's a complaint of insomnia, they don't do the research anymore. They basically just assign SMR for the elite athlete.
There's this relationship between these brain patterns and sleep, right? Frontal beta spindles are going to create impulsivity. They're going to activate. They're going to affect regulation, but it'll also throw off your sleep. And so we see that there's this kind of downward reinforcing spiral that occurs when you have these inherent brain patterns that may get amplified with poor sleep, but they're actually contributing to the poor sleep as a whole as well, right? And so with the neurofeedback, again, we're assuming it's neurofeedback or neuromodulation because that's what this podcast is about. But with that, we get to start to flip that curve. We get to we create this upward spiral. We get to improve the beta spindling, which is going to help with their impulsivity, which is also going to in turn help them sleep better, right? And so we see this beautiful relationship getting restored, whereas before that, there was this reinforcement in the negative direction, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really impressive to be able to see people make a turnaround in their life trajectory. The epilepsy is a really dramatic one. I mean, intractable epilepsy where you're having hundreds of seizures a day, your life trajectory doesn't have exactly lift. I mean, you're going to bump along on the ground. You're not going to take off. I mean, it's a ruined life. But you can train them to not have them and turn their life around, turn it into a happy young child that ends up having normal life experiences. If intractable epilepsy, you can't go swimming without somebody being right there because you have a seizure in the water, you can die. So you can do normal life things, hang upside down on the monkey bars without worrying about, falling and hitting your head any more than anybody else might. So anyway,
it sounds almost too good to be true, Jay. It sounds, when I hear myself saying these things to people, and again, I'm just going to qualify this because again, we always have to, we don't diagnose, seizures or epilepsy. We don't treat seizures or epilepsy, but we can see brain patterns that are associated with it, and we can train the brain to become more stable, and that's all we do, right? But we see the effect of it, and the effect of it is transformational. And I agree, Jay. I mean, I haven't been doing this nearly as long as you, but even the last 5 years, I mean, we've seen now dozens and dozens and dozens of cases with seizures and epilepsy, and to begin to see the trajectory of that child's life begin to come back online, and they begin to be able to do the normal things again, and their identity begins to get reestablished again, right? They become more of themselves, and that's just so gratifying.
If you can turn around epilepsy that's considered intractable, where they want to do brain surgery to stop the epilepsy, if you can turn that around to be a successful optimized function, ADD, depression, OCD, these things are a piece of cake by comparison. It's astounding how much the brain can self-regulate, the plasticity. Plastic sounds like a bad thing nowadays, but plasticity is malleable or reformable. The brain that can recreate its connections and change how it functions. It's astounding to see the extent of self-regulation that the brain can do with a little bit of help with some feedback. And it's a driver's training course for the brain. And
I agree. And I always say, to parents, I say, I'm so grateful that your child's brain is so much smarter than I am. Right. We take it for granted that our brains and our bodies but especially our brains are self-healing and self-organizing. They need help. There's limitations to matter. There are things that we're born with that are inherently limiting. But there's so much potential that's sitting there. And that with a little bit of help, like you say, I'm just reiterating and echoing what you're saying, Jay, is that with a little bit of help, we get to help the brain reorganize better and become more efficient and more effective, right? But ultimately, again, and this is like such a major passion and driver for me, is that you get to see the child become more of who they are, right? We're not distorting them. We're not manipulating them. We're not training them to be somebody they're not. They become more fully integrated beings, and more of themselves come back online. That's just so cool, right?
It's kept me in this field for 50 years.
Yeah.
And me in 3. Dr. Licata, if somebody's in Pasadena, California, and they want to drop by, how can they learn a little bit more about you?
The easiest thing, vitalbrainhealth.com/noodle.
Noodle.
I would say that's the yes. We'll share our slides. We'll share this. I'll share this slide deck. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold
Okay.
of us. But if they want to get a consultation or brain map, greater LA area, and we have people fly in to see us. We have people, that drive 1-2 hours at a time each way to see us. But there are so many great neurofeedback practitioners around. Just reach out. We'll connect you.
Dr. Licata, great job. Jay Gunkelman, as usual.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you, like our gold supporter, Applied Neuroscience, and our silver supporter, Mind Media. Earn up to 16 CEU hours by attending Applied Neuroscience's NeuroGuide Workshop March 4th and 5th in Madeira Beach, Florida. It's led by none other than Dr. Robert Thatcher himself. There are 2 ways you can attend, online or in person, with the link appliedneuroscience.com/attend-ng-workshops. Mind Media, get the latest EEG and neurofeedback technology from mindmedia.com. Their semi-dry sensor cap is a wonder to see, and their EEG amplifiers have been trusted in the field for decades. Their neurofeedback and QEEG courses will get you up to speed in no time. Visit mindmedia.com now.